Hello and welcome to this really special panel discussion today. I'm Brett Hill. I'm the founder of the Mindful Coach Association, and I have the opportunity and the pleasure of facilitating conversation with these brilliant people. You're going to love this. This is a collection, the stories from a collection of authors that the Changing Work Organization Association has put together a book. It's called Leading with Self-Awareness, starting from the inside out, which is, of course, fabulous because that's where it's all at. And this book is these 25 authors, and today we have 3 of them. And so we're going to hear from them, their stories, their inspirations. And the thing I love about this book is that, oh man, these stories, they really are powerful and they really reach you. And as you'll see for yourself. And today I would like to bring to you, our esteemed audience, Nicole Seawell, Amy Serene, and Tricia Livermore, all of whom have written chapters from the book. So let's just go around. And Amy, your book, your title was Integrating the Moments of Mystical Self-Surrender. Tell us about, well, in fact, let's just go around. Let's do Amy and then Nicole and Tricia, and just say what it is that got you to say yes to, I want to write something for this book.
Thank you so much, Brett, for hosting this with us today. Lovely to be here. I'm one of the co-founders of Changing Work, so the book was definitely something that I wanted to be able to be a part of and to be able to share what it is that brought me to this work as a whole. And so integrating the moments of mystical self-surrender are really about the work that I do in my life and in the world. And if I could just had the opportunity to share one of those really impactful moments that really changed the course of my life with people, and if that touches just one person, and if one person has a glimmer of curiosity about the internal work, as we talk about starting from the inside out, then that's enough.
Beautiful. Well, you achieved your goal because I'm one person that was impacted. So yay, yay.
Perfect. I am a success. Nicole.
Well, again, like Amy, Brett, thank you for hosting us. And it's wonderful to be here with you, Amy and Tricia. And I think that speaks of the whole experience. When there was an opportunity to be part of a cohort of writers, not only do you get to share that piece of wisdom that you hope will resonate with one or more, but you get to learn. So it was a really wonderful experience for me. It was a stretch goal, something that I wanted to do, to write and to be able to share. For years, clientele has been saying, "Where's your book?" And then I would go home and be like, "Where's my book?" I'm like, "It's in there somewhere." I'm not quite sure how to get it out. And it was really a beautiful experiment, I would say, almost for me to be part of it and find that chapter. And maybe someday there'll be a full book, but that chapter and along the lines, and as we dig into the chapters, for me is that I think oftentimes for leaders, and I use that term very broadly, we're expected to be superhuman. And it's really the human experience that makes us the best leaders. And that's what's so much about my own experience in writing and sharing, but also in reading my co-authors' chapters, I was really moved by and learned by, is that we're all humans. And oftentimes those pitfalls is what teaches us the most and the most relatable that we can put into place. So really wonderful, the overall experience for me and to be able to impact.
So did you guys actually meet as a collection of writers in the framing of this? I mean, that in and of itself is a pretty unique situation. So that I'd like to talk about that. So another conversation, but that's really interesting. Tricia. Oops, you're still on mute.
Great.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Yeah, and I apologize if I'm sounding a little hoarse. I've been sick for the last few days. So I think, what really came up for me around this book and this collective is, as a volunteer for Changing Work, I am passionately interested in creating community with other people and allowing our voices to be heard, so that others know that, the situations they're in, they're not alone in them. we are all one, and we all have these amazing experiences and some very challenging experiences in our lives. And the more that we can collectively share our experiences, the more to aim to touch one person, right? And each of our chapters will touch different people at different stages in their life. And so for me, it was just really, it was a introspection, reflection, and a creation of where is the self-awareness journey for me, and how do I share that with others so that they could see themselves in that. So it's really important for me that people can know that they're not alone. And I think that's really the key, especially in this world that we're living in, where people feel very isolated and alone. They could reach out to any single person in this book and would get a response from them, because this author group is just amazing. Well, so is Changing Work. The community is amazing too. So they're real humans with real problems, with real challenges, sharing their real stories.
Beautiful. I love that so much. So I'd like to now just kind of talk with each of you a little bit about your individual contribution, and in no particular order, let's begin with Nicole. Your chapter is titled, "Your Reality is What the Other Person Thinks You Said." Well, I mean, I can go on for a long time about, oh my God, yes, and thank you for that so much. And I just was really taken by your story because it was so personal, and it started with, you know, I'm thinking, oh, this is a business book, and you're going to tell us about how you learned all this in business, but it's not. This chapter is so much about you and your family, and how you integrate, you know, communication into your family in a way that actually, you know, seemed like you had to unlearn quite a bit in order to make that work. So tell us about that journey. Like in your story, you talk about how your communication style, like, you know, I'm very businessy, let's get things done, let's get agreement and move on. And that seemed to be like a problem for you, that you had to refactor some things.
So it's really, my chapter was focusing on that gap, or that delta between intention and impact. Right? Oftentimes we will all say something, especially talk about in the business world, the leader says something and they're like, all right, why aren't people doing it? And people walk away from the announcement or their email or their computer, whatever it is, and they scratch their head and they're like, I don't really know what they even meant. Or worse yet, they assign poor intention, like they have a negative reaction to it. And you have this place of confusion. And I'm a big believer in that leadership starts at home. We're one person all the way through. And, you know, your kids, for me, are unfiltered. They'll let you know what they really think. You're getting a job review all the time, and you can see that in their faces. You can see that in their reactions to you. So I have to say it was a little uncomfortable, but I was really pushed to dig into that and share. And I tried to be very thoughtful about not making it about one. I have 3 sons within less than 4 years. And so it was really fertile testing ground about, oh, well, if it works, I'm great. And if it doesn't work, what's wrong with one of us? So it was an opportunity to show that one message is received many different ways, sometimes effectively, sometimes not. And that our individual way isn't really what the determinant is, right? The success of a communication. And let's be clear, everything is a communication, and the success of a communication is measured at the receiver's ear, not the speaker's mouth. So even right now, as we're having this conversation, if it's landing well, then we're like, oh, aren't we both so smart and together? And if it's not, there is this kind of like, ooh, is there something wrong with one of us? And is it me or is it you? Like, where is that falling apart? So those 3 boys of mine, you know, really showed me that I put something out. And my first was very much like me. And so he and I are quick and direct and action oriented and can multitask, even though the world says you shouldn't. But it was kind of a fun and good place for us. And my second was very humbling for me, as the chapter shares, and I won't repeat it, but he was like, no. And one of the favorite things that people have said to me is that in the chapter at one point during the COVID years, you know, they were all in their teenage years, and, you know, their friends are very much their place of importance, and they couldn't see their friends. They couldn't go to school. It was a very challenging time for many people. And I said, well, Dad and I are just hanging out and we don't get to see our other people. And he looked us right in the eye and he said, you chose each other. I didn't choose you.
Wow.
So it showed so much perspective is your reality.
Yeah. So that must, what did that do? Like at what point did you come to a realization somewhere like I've got to adapt to this situation? Like what brought that into focus for you and how did you navigate that?
Great question, Brett. Yes, I think the moment of him saying that was this aha, almost like this bubble of this isn't working. And there's no one for me, I shouldn't speak for others, that I care more about than my children. So different than maybe an office relationship of leader and team and whatnot, is that I wanted to get it right from the very depth of my soul, and I wasn't getting it right. And I could look at it, was that on me or was that on him? And it really was that there was just this misconnection. We were losing that ability to connect. And so I actually turned to a tool I learned many years before called the Enneagram. And it was just this way to get a common language about how I see the world and how he sees the world. And it was my opportunity as mother, as parent, to pivot my own style to match more of his receiving style. And boy, when I did that, it was like magic. Because he had said to me, I never lacked feeling loved. I felt misunderstood.
Wow, so powerful.
Right. And when I pivoted, when I made a change, he gave more grace and positive toward me, being like, oh, she's really trying. And it was just like magic. And now he's off, in the latter years of university and calls just to chat because our relationship evolved so well with that. And that was kind of my take is that doesn't just go in family relationships, that goes in all of your communications.
Beautiful. Yeah, you said, here's a quote from your chapter, I learned to communicate and act as they needed in certain moments, not necessarily what I would have needed at their ages. And I really appreciated that because so many times we look at what we want, how we communicate through the lens of how I wish it had been for me. And that might not be what is needed in the moment.
Absolutely. And it's that ability to press the pause button on yourself. I'm quick and I'm ready to say the next thing. My brain goes very fast. And it's that pause button to be like, in this situation, what does Brett need? Not me. And then pivoting how I go about it. Not just the words I choose, but the pace in which I go, whether I make statements or questions, whether I put a whole bunch of things together or let it come out one by one. Those type of things are all choices in how we communicate.
So such a deep learning, and I really like it that you brought in using the Enneagram, and I put that in brackets and go, a tool for helping us to connect in a common language, right? And because it's outside of you, it becomes something, it's not your judgment or your opinion, it's something you can both reference. That's so powerful. I really like that. You also said, it took me years to figure out that the disconnect was my communication style and not my lack of love. And that really, I felt that in my heart. And I think maybe did and like you said, it was kind of like a key that unlocked the relational connection for you.
I think you hit the nail on the head by having that aha moment and then having a tool to use. When using it, it wasn't that there was something wrong with me or something wrong with him, or that there was some hierarchy of one way was better than another, but rather that we just had different ways of seeing the world, and how we saw the world was how we communicated about it. And when we could realize more objectively those differences, it separated out intention from impact. And then we both had the ability to change up how we were doing it and really going to growth. I think the whole book is based on opportunities to grow. And I think Trisha said earlier, like, we're all human and we all have tricky things and we don't actually experience all the same tricky things or at the same times. But for me, this was an opportunity to do better in something that mattered the absolute most to me. And then when telling that story more offhand, not publishing it, early on, my clients wanted to know how to do that, not just in their offices, but with their families. And it's nice to have an objective tool that helps people to just like, oh, this is just how it is, and I can grow from it.
Yeah, beautiful. Amy, you have a question?
I do, Nicole. I'm so curious because, I think one of the things that we're trying to do with changing work, and just I think in all of our lives in general, is figure out how do we be human and how do we be professionals, and what lessons do we get to pull and take from each of those experiences in our lives. And my question for you, I'm really curious about, as this relationship shifted with your son, did you start to notice anything shift in your professional relationships, or did you notice that awareness translate into other areas of your life, and what was the experience of that for you?
Great question. Without realizing or expecting it to be a positive side effect, I think overall my awareness increased because I realized what seemed like it was working. Because professionally, people don't let it show quite as quickly, generally, that it's not working or they're not connecting with you. More so, they walk out of the room and scratch their head or just like, right? And you're like, I don't really know. And so it did cause me to practice that pause more and try things in different ways, or simply ask questions of like, did that make sense? Or what would work better? And ask people to really give me something back. So I did think it brought me an overall increased awareness about my impact.
I love that. And I think I have one quick follow-up is that when not everybody's going to be open to answering the question or feel comfortable if we ask them, did that make sense? Or do you need further clarification on something? A lot of times people might be like, oh, it's not, I can't ask, or I need to pretend like I already know, or I'll go figure it out later. Were there any tips or tricks, or as you became more aware of it, were there subtleties that you started to pick up on with people that could help you sort of create that container of comfort and safety for them to feel like it was okay to ask for clarification?
That actually is a great point. And I would say it's never one size fits all. And because I use the Enneagram in my professional work, that is so reinforcing to me, is that I actually know who I can say to, does that make sense? What would you do? And there are certain types that are more, let's say, assertive, and they'll answer that question full on, and you will get all the information you need and maybe more. There are certain types that withdraw more internally. And because I use that tool in the work, I know pretty early on people's styles and preferences. So certain ways that you just ask, the questions that you choose, the wording or how, or even saying, hey, do you mind sharing back to me what you think I said so I could learn? So it doesn't feel like a burden on them or a put upon. Or oftentimes I share things ahead and allow them to prepare and get comfortable prior to an in-person or live engagement, whether it's in person or on the computer like we're doing now. The other thing I just wanted to throw out, Amy, and I'd be curious if you and Trisha felt this way, and Brett, feel free to. I think for women, we carry an extra burden on the professional and personal, wearing both hats, and sometimes being seen as less professional if we bring up our personal. So I can also say, and I'd be curious to say, that I struggled at first whether this was a good chapter for me to write, if I should have come across as more professional. Since we've released the book and I've gotten a lot of feedback from professional friends, I've chosen that it is the right one, because there's been a lot of people of all genders that are like, I so relate, whether it was within their parenting or just relationships in their personal life. But I did struggle a bit to think that I was going to be seen as I'm less than professional, or I'll leave it at that. What do you two think, if it relates at all?
Yeah, Trisha, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because I think as women, we do have a tendency to want to separate our personal and professional lives because we've been told to do that, right? And so it feels a little uncomfortable putting our own personal stories out there in a more professional capacity. But what I've learned is that it makes us more human, right? People can see, and that's from my own corporate experience as well. People didn't know me personally. To know me personally, they're like, oh wow, you're a totally different person. I'm like, oh wow, this is really interesting. So yeah, I can completely relate of like really putting yourself out there in a more personal way.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I think I've been trained and ingrained to, be this person here and then be this person over here, right? And that those are very separate. And I feel like part of the reason I chose to share the chapter that I did is because a lot of the work I'm trying to do just in my life in general is about building a bridge between those two. And so I'm feeling very comfortable standing with one foot on either side of that stream of self and just being all in on both sides. But that took a while. And I think I was thinking about this last night, actually, this idea that at work expects largely for us to be these like very fully formed, fully perfect versions of ourselves, right? You have to be the highest performer, the highest achiever, right? Healthy, whole, sound, right? And so we try to sometimes pretend to be that so that we fit into that mold. And so there's this acceptance that the broken or the misinformed, misaligned, or misunderstood parts of us aren't okay to bring there. And so I think part of what we're all trying to do, I think, in the world right now with changing work is just dismantling that idea.
Yeah, I agree completely. That sounds amazing. I relate to that in the sense that I think that this notion of work and life, and I need two different parts of me, is mostly an illusion, an unhealthy one, that helps to create compartmentalization that is good for, getting things done and producing things, but bad for human beings. And I think really that's kind of the core mission of changing work. And for those of us that are called to kind of do this more integration work. So thank you, Nicole. That was really, really powerful and really important. And I agree with your other feedback that it was great to see it start out, at home, the message you were bringing, because that, to me, that means you embodied the somatic truth of this learning. It wasn't just an idea, you went through the real school of learning it the hard way. And I just made me, felt like very connecting.
Thank you, Brett.
Amy, let's talk about your chapter, Integrating the Moments of Mystical Self-Surrender. Now, I have to confess, I'm kind of a mystic myself, and so it's like this really resonated with me. And your opening scene, oh my goodness, I felt like I was in a Netflix special. And I'm just going to read this to you, and I want you to kind of fill in the blanks. It says, you open up with a riveting story about how you were invited to participate on an actual journey going somewhere, but you wind up boarding the plane, quote, with a suitcase full of clothes and tears. Fill in the blanks there a little bit for us.
So I was supposed to travel with a friend, and she spent weeks making sure that I was prepared for this trip, connecting me with people, making sure I had every single thing that I needed, all the way down to the day before I got a really, really heartbreaking phone call that she had taken her own life. And so there were many, I talk a lot about the synchronicities and the signs that help us either see whether we are in or out of alignment in our lives or in our work. And all of the moments leading up to this trip that I was supposed to go on with this friend had kind of veered me away from the type of experience that I was setting out to go and have with this friend. I had multiple opportunities to go on these different trips over the course of the decade prior, none of which worked out. And this is the one that did. And it was visceral that this is where and I'm supposed to be. And that this person in their final days on this earth decided that one of the things that they needed to do was make sure that I got there. And so I feel a very strong sense of just the gravity of that and of what must have been going through her head at the time when she might have been thinking, I'm going to make sure Amy safely arrives here. And also I'm choosing to leave this earth. And how I fit into that equation, I'm not quite sure, but it has left a mark on me.
Wow, undoubtedly. I mean, that's an extremely poignant moment to find yourself in, particularly, I mean, just even metaphorically, like you're actually leaving the ground, heading to some other place.
Yeah.
And then you are met by, I'm going to say somewhat mysterious character that you called the farmer.
Yeah.
And it seems like you landed in this place where you could just really, really reflect and unwind in an unusually deep way. What was that experience like for you?
Well, I think, and part of the reason I chose to share this particular story is that at that point in my life, I had decided to kind of take the deep dive into my own personal healing work. And healing for all of us who have started or embarked upon it, it is messy. It hurts. It is a dark night of the soul, as Joseph Campbell might refer to it in The Hero's Journey. It is our quest into the unknown and things that we don't know about ourselves emerge. And so that's why I chose to share this in this book about self-awareness, is that this was really the time in my life where I had said, and I'm not quite sure why in hindsight, because sometimes ignorance is bliss, right? We don't get to go back to that though. But at this particular point in my life, I had said, I'm all in. I am hurting. I am not whole, and something needs to change. And so I am going to seek out and give myself up to any and all ways that I can find that sense of peace and wholeness and understanding who I am, so that I can find happiness in my life. And so this was one of those moments, and the farmer is one of those people that's been a really important part of that journey for me. And so when I talk also about sort of straddling the stream of self and standing on the bridge between that place, where do we get to be this human that we are, or do we have to be this whole, perfectly suited up professional? I had just kind of taken a leap out of that. And I was like, I don't know who I'm going to be when I come out of this process of self-inquiry, but I'm going to dive headfirst into it.
And so that's the self-surrender part you're talking about, where you just kind of, I don't know who I am in a way, right? And just really letting yourself go. So how did you do that? I mean, there's sometimes in my work, I call it like the heat of your context, kind of gives you enough energy to kind of do something like that. But what did you do to kind of say, no, I'm just going to let go. I'm just going to unfold. I'm not going to judge. Was there a process like that of some kind?
Yeah, it was tripping and falling over myself time and time again, I think. There were a lot of different modalities that I had started to pick up over the years. And I've always been on the more creative, out of the box side of things. I've never quite fit a mold. I've always been sort of weird and different, and I've embraced that entirely. I embraced it pretty young, actually, because I think I recognized that I was like, this ain't gonna change. This is who I am.
Right.
But that took me through through a lot. I was very academic when I was young. I was very book smart, very intelligent, but I was also very curious. I was very curious about the things that I couldn't see, that I could sense. And so prior to this sort of deep dive, if you will, I spent a number of years studying different sorts of healing arts modalities. And so as I started to practice different types of energy work and healing tools, I started to become more perceptive, right? Our intuition is a muscle. So the more we use it, the stronger it gets. And so that inner guidance system kept pointing me towards different modalities, different tools, different opportunities would show up and present themselves. And I guess my sort of all in, if you will, was just me saying that when they would present themselves, I just said yes. I would surrender and just say yes and be like, let's learn it, let's try it, let's experience it. And so that brought me down the path of a very wide range of healing tools and self-care or self-development or healing types of work. And so it was probably at this point about 15 or 16 years that I've been learning these different tools that I've just been kind of stacking and exploring. And now I have this beautiful toolkit that I can kind of pull from and know, like, when my soul or when my heart or when any part of me needs something, I can kind of reach into that basket and say, okay, this is the tool for this time. Or when I'm working with other people, I can sense into what's happening for them. Okay, this might be the right tool to either teach or offer or use with somebody else as they're going through a similar circumstance in their lives.
Well, that sounds like a really fabulous resource to be able to bring to wherever you're working with or the organizations as well. Like a lot of tools on the shelf, right?
Yeah.
And then the capacity to know, oh, this is the one. It's sort of like what Nicole was saying in terms of adapting the message for the individual. It's a really
Absolutely.
I like it. Yeah, go ahead.
One of my favorite quotes that I believe is out of The Artist's Way book is that there are as many divine paths to union as there are people. And so there are as many unique ways to each of us finding the way that makes sense for us in our healing journey or our personal or professional evolution. And it takes all of those different parts, pieces, modalities, tools, and it's putting them together in the mosaic that makes the most sense for each of us individually. I don't think that there's a one size fits all approach. And I don't think that necessarily taking a deep dive into the self-surrender is for everybody. I think there's different depths and layers that we need to all get comfortable swimming in as we explore.
And so for you, you talked about this as the mystical aspects of self-surrender. So can you speak more to like what mystery did you wade into here that needed to be integrated, that went up with this integration work?
So when we're talking about anything that alters our state of consciousness, and for anybody that's done anything like breath work or even plant medicine work or even different types of meditation that can take us into a very deep state, oftentimes people will come out of those experiences and feel like they experienced something that's ineffable, something that is different than anything that they have seen, tasted, sensed, or touched in this world with our eyes open. And so I call those mystical moments, right? Anything that feels like it's bigger than us or connects us to something outside of or beyond ourselves that really includes ourselves. But for a moment, it might feel like it's something that's different. And so when I talk about integrating those moments, it's saying, well, if you have a moment where you feel like you watched your heart get pulled out onto this beautiful platter in space and all of the tendrils of your trauma were opened up in these ribbons and something lit them with a fuse of love. And as they each came back into the center of your heart, you felt something wash over your entire being and you felt fundamentally different. That's a moment of mystical self-surrender. And while that can be a really beautiful experience, if somebody comes out of having that type of experience and they just feel confused, then there's a moment where that needs to be integrated. That needs to be worked and massaged into the psyche, into the heart, and into the way that we walk in the world. And so that's what integration means to me, is that how do we walk through the world with those moments of mystical self-surrender and how they have changed us, and how do we understand them, appreciate them, and then share the new version of ourselves with all of the people around us, because then that's really where the magic happens, is that when we get to interact as these healed whole versions of ourselves, then that's the ripple effect that we get to create in the world.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm just really impacted by that. It's really powerful. So, I mean, it's truly a challenge to do that kind of work. And, there are lots of people who have all kinds of, mm, so it's almost the opposite of disintegration work. It's like bringing the bits together. This is having an integration work. It's kind of like realizing a whole that makes clear your separateness. And so now you have to kind of engage your wholeness rather than dealing with your parts. And it's the same story, but from a different container, if I'm making any sense at all. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
people talk about some of these types of experiences being like 20 years of therapy in one day, right? Like we've all heard that expression, but our mind can't actually keep up with that.
Right.
Like it
Yeah.
might seem that way, but then we don't get to necessarily become completely different in one day, even though we might have
Mm,
had an experience that felt like we just radically shifted. It's like all of the programming, the habits, the inner chatter, the dialogue, the way that we hold our bodies, the way that we go through the calendar and the schedule of our day, right? All of that needs to catch up. And that's the
mhm,
integration. The integration is that
mhm.
when we've just stepped into a space that is timeless and we've had an experience that has fundamentally changed us in some way, now how do we step back into time and let
Yep.
all of that catch up, right? If that was
Yep.
20 years that just happened in one night, then what do the next 20 years actually
Yeah.
look like?
Right. Right. And what does my now look like? I mean, that's yin
Yeah,
yang in a nutshell, right? I'm both
yeah.
timeless and time bound in the
Mhm.
same moment, and navigating that awareness is a big deal. So, wow, so powerful. Um, yeah, and you said in your chapter, our capacity to connect with others is limited only by the depth of our connection to ourselves,
Yeah.
which I thought was really beautifully said.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's where when I mentioned that it's about, right, as we integrate those experiences, then how do we engage differently with each other? And so that is when I think of changing work, I think of changing work almost as the ultimate integration because it's like, how do we change from the inside out, right? How do we each find our unique path to whatever that looks like with whatever the tools are that come together that create that experience for us? And then if we want to change work, that means that's where we all start to have to start interacting and connecting with each other. So how do we
mhm.
integrate who we've become through the work that we've done from the inside out? And then how do we now go into a system with other people and change together, change something else together?
Sure. Yeah. Nicole.
Amy, I love your enthusiasm around your story too, because you make it so approachable.
Mm,
Sometimes when you hear the word mystical, it feels, oh, I don't know if I'm deep enough for that. So I just wanted to thank you
Mhm,
first and foremost for that. And then second, your storytelling really led me to believe when you say connection, like connect with yourself and then connect with others,
mhm,
does something immediately come to mind? Like my bent is always on communication. So is it a
mm,
self-communication when you're connecting, not necessarily in words, but
mhm.
what do you mean by connecting? And then how do you take that from that self-connection outward for impact with other positive connection?
Yeah, great clarifying question. So when I think about connecting with self, I think about connecting to intuition, connecting with not any of the voices and the chatter and the parts as I use in the internal family systems model, not connecting to any of those particular parts, but the self, the central self energy, which is the seat of our intuition. It is the core of who we are without judgment, without fear, without anxiety. It is our kind, compassionate, and curious self. So that's what I say, that's what I mean when I say connect to self is that part of us that is free of all of the noise. And then when I say connecting with other people, it's moments like this, how do we have real, genuine connection with each other, communication with each other, where we're all here. I mean, I'm looking at all of us through, even just since we have started, we are all leaning forward, just so curious about each other. And I love it. And it's this sense of none of us, we're not judging. We're just so cute. We just want to probably go, oh my gosh, can we go? How much longer past the hour can we go?
Right?
Can we delve in further, right? There's this joy and this excitement and this genuine desire to know one another. And that's what I think of connection with others, is like the joy of getting to know somebody.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's so powerful. I really appreciate your message. We'll come back and have everybody a chance to kind of summarize before we're done. Tricia, I want to be sure to have time to talk to you about your really excellent chapter called From Inner Critic to Inner Peace. And whoa, I know a lot of people can relate to that. At least one present person can do that. And so I wanted to ask you, because your story really was a strong testament to, hard choices that you've had to make in your life, and a lot of them were like ending scenarios that just weren't working for you, and there's a cost involved with that. And you begin and a benefit, of course, right? But still, there's like, how should I say? It's like hard-fought lessons and hard. You described yourself at the beginning as post-Catholic, and I really appreciated that phrase, because I know a few post-Catholic. I'm not one, but I know a few, and that's a thing, isn't it? And then you also said but you wound up keeping your faith hidden. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what that was like for you to kind of, carry around this, I don't know, would you call it a secret, or like you just didn't want to share that, or what was that like? How did that come about, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, it's funny because like I think in a lot like Amy, the mystical, and like what Nicole said, like mystical seems kind of woo-woo and out there, and we don't really know what that means. And as I realized Catholicism was not for me, there were just so many things about it that was like did not resonate with me. So I went on this journey, and I think Gary Zukav's Seed of the Soul was like my very first book I read, and it was like, ooh, it sparked this like amazing interest of intuition and what do I want to believe? And I read a lot of mystical people, spiritual psychics, mediums. I read a lot of books that 20 years ago people didn't talk about stuff like that. It wasn't shared, it wasn't common knowledge. So, when I did share just even briefly with people, they're like, they couldn't really understand. So I didn't really have any community to share things. Although I did have, at the time, a couple of friends who we did talk that way and talk about like, what does the afterlife look like? What do we think it looks like? How do we see why we're here? What are we supposed to be doing here? So there were, a couple of friends that I had, but the world around me was so analytical based, and my trying to climb the corporate ladder was very masculine based. So I sort of had to put it on a shelf. Like it was a part of me, but I couldn't let it be seen. At least that's how it felt at the time.
Oh, I see what you mean. A lot of it was contextual, just like what's important to me just isn't okay to talk about in the environment that I'm in. And that actually it seems like almost a theme through your book. It's kind of like who I am isn't okay in the environment that I'm in. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that comes from childhood, right? I was an emotional child, and I was, it was not okay to be emotional in my family. And so I had to suppress that, right? I had to suppress my emotionality. And so it's just funny how these themes show up in the world, like throughout as you go into adulthood. That inner critic of, oh, you can't share this, you can't be this person, you can't show up like this because people will react negatively to you, and you won't be liked, and you're going to be called names or whatever the case is. And so this inner critic of mine became a stronghold of like what I could and couldn't do according to the rules of the world. And eventually it caught up with me in the form of an autoimmune disease. So I did have to make some hard choices.
Wow. That sounds really a tough journey, but such a worthy journey. You said you had a story about here you are and you're wondering about all of this, is there more to life than what I can see? And I think Amy said it really well. It's like you can see, you can sense, but you can't see. And it's sort of like, so it seemed like that was alive in you. And then you talk about your son having an experience where he was saying, I don't want to go to this room in the back of the house because grandfather, who had passed, was sitting on the bed. And it's kind of like, oh, okay. So what happened to you? What was that about what was the impact of you on having your son report that to you?
It was a really beautiful moment. I was at my mother-in-law's house with my son and his dad, and I think a couple of other family members. So he came back in the room and he's like, I can't go back there by myself. And he's like, Grandpa's back there. And we all looked at each other like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And then so I took him back there. It was fine. He said, Grandpa's not there now. I'm like, okay. So we came back and he was playing, and we actually had a really beautiful conversation with the family members in the room. My mother-in-law at the time believed it. She's like, I feel him. I feel him around me. I know he's here. And so we had this really deep, meaningful conversation. It was about a few months after his passing. And I felt a lot closer to everyone in the room there who, and my brother-in-law, who doesn't believe in any of that, he just kind of sat there and listened. And he's like, this is really an interesting situation. He didn't deny it in any way, shape, or form, but it was a really beautiful moment for me personally to know that when you're at a young age, that veil hasn't come over their eyes so they can see beyond what we see here. And it was sort of the proof that I wanted to know existed. And it instilled in me this belief that yes, our energy moves beyond this world, and they're still there. They're still here for us, and we can choose to see them, hear them, smell them. I smell them, and it gave me a lot of comfort.
I love that very much, because it's like when the world affirms what you know is so in a way that doesn't matter if anybody else has that experience or not. You've had an experience, and it changes you in a way we've been talking about all through this conversation. You also so you talked about the inner critic. So how did you come into awareness that this inner critic was a part of you and not who you were, that you kind of needed to renegotiate the terms with, so to speak? How did you begin to deal with that, and what did that do for you?
Yeah, it's through some executive coaching, I realized that I learned about the ego, right? And then I did a lot of research around the ego, which is that inner critic. It's basically all the nasty things we tell about ourselves. The not so wonderful thoughts that we think about who we think we are. And so I had a lot of coaching, executive coaching, and some, also I've, done some traditional therapy and non-traditional therapy, spiritual counseling, along those lines of really identifying, how do I want to talk to my inner self? And I think like what Amy talked about, like, what is the connection to who we are and who we want to be? And I wanted to connect more with my intuition, my higher wisdom, my higher self. And the more I connected with that part of myself, the less I listened to the negative thoughts or the inner critic of what they wanted to try and tell me, which was purely egoic based, right? And then, you know, this takes practice. Like if you have these wired thoughts in your mind for, you know, 40 something years, it requires a significant amount of awareness, of noticing, reflecting, being curious about what those thoughts are and what they really mean for you and where you want to be and how you want to show up. So it really takes a lot of practice. And I tell people that all the time, like, you don't just flip a switch and you suddenly change, just like Amy's integration. You know, you might have this epiphany, but you have to integrate it. And with that comes practice. So practicing affirmations, practicing a variety of different ways that work for you so that you can really connect with your higher self, and who you want to be. And sometimes it feels like a lifelong journey.
Thank you so much. I mean, it is a lifelong journey, isn't it? And I just really appreciate your story and your perseverance, you know. Amy, we would love to have your question, but I want to move on as well. So just keep that in mind. So please, let's have your question, and then we can, sorry, I wasn't clear. Let's have your question, but let's kind of keep it brief if we can. And because I want to have time for people to all go through and say, how can they connect with you and what you're doing now?
Absolutely. Trisha, you just, as I'm listening to you and I'm reflecting on what Nicole's chapter is about and what my chapter is about, the thing that keeps coming up is this idea of that all of these conversations are amazing. And why do we feel like we can't have them in or around the workplace? So I'm just curious, as like this insecurity has sort of, dissipated out into the ethers, what would be something that you would tell people about either what you would want or what they might try on in terms of getting more comfortable having these types of conversations in a mainstream environment?
Yeah, I think from what I've noticed from my own experience is being vulnerable, right? Just being vulnerable and sharing. And I've done that on some occasions where like I have an intuitive hit about something and I share something with somebody and not taking it personal no matter their reaction, right? So they might be like, that doesn't resonate. Okay, great. Or sometimes they'll be like, oh, wow, how did you come up with that? Like, how did you know I was feeling or thinking or whatever the case is? And you can have a really instant impact with somebody. So just really, taking the risk and trying it out and seeing what happens without taking it personally.
That's master class advice right there. I think that's really good stuff. So let's take some time. Amy, let's start with you. How can people connect with you and your work?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. And thanks again for this. This is just such a wonderful conversation. I've just really enjoyed being with my fellow co-authors. And I did want to just share one other quick thing just about the book in general, A Changing Work.
Absolutely.
So these are collections from the community. This is members of the community, people who are out in the world trying to share their support, their love, their guidance, their experiences about how they are changing work. And so we will have a continued cycle of these books continuing to roll out. We're in the process of having the second book written about leading with compassion, fostering connection from the inside out, which is a beautiful kind of next step as we move through the path of self-awareness, we move into the space of compassion. So some of the ways that people can connect with me are through the Changing Work community. So changingwork.org, or if anybody's interested in the work that I do with integration or intuitive development, Serene Integration is my website, sereneintegration.com, and LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Echoing Amy, thank you so much, Brett, for this opportunity. And both to Amy and Trisha, this has been such a joy to have this opportunity to share alongside of you. If you want to connect with me, LinkedIn is super easy. And then my website is called Sailor's Sweet Life. And there's a whole story behind that, but we don't have time. But I believe that everyone deserves a sweet life, and it's right there for the taking. And a big part of working with me is taking, getting you outside your head to action. My clients always call me action, because I'll be like, so what's the action? Because at the end of the day, it's what we do, not what we say or how we feel, but how we bring that together, to borrow words from Amy, to integrate into the action, because that's our reality. So take that action. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can go to sailorsweetlife.com or simply email me at info@sailorsweetlife.com. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Fabulous. Everyone connect with these people, because this is incredible stuff. Trisha.
Yeah, you can find me at my website, Soul, S-O-U-L, soulbusinessadvisor.com, and also on LinkedIn. I'm a heart-centered life and leadership coach, so I help others really gain that intuitive connection so they can let go of their inner critic.
Ooh, nice. I love that. So what's the name of your business again? It's
Soul Business Advisor, S-O-U-L.
Soul Business Advisor. Boy, if there was ever a phrase that accompanied like the mission of the transformation of changing work, that I think that's it. It's just like, this has been such an incredible conversation to, what are some like themes and threads that you've heard that we can kind of weave this all together? Like how would you say are the common things that have lit up for you? Just anyone.
Yeah, I really appreciated this conversation. Nicole's style of communication and that self-awareness of really wanting to improve the family life, gaining self-awareness, the connection that we have with ourselves, like Amy talked about, and integrating that connection and creating that connection with others is really beautiful. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity with the three of you to talk about this.
I would piggyback on that, and maybe it should be so very obvious since the name of the book has self-awareness in it, but I would say that it's that awareness and our opportunity to live the lives we want, lead as we hope to make positive impact, is having that awareness first and foremost with ourselves, taking off of Amy, connecting with ourselves, taking off Trisha, like not being our biggest critic, but rather our biggest fan. And then I would put myself on that awareness of communicating in a way that allows those connections to flourish and keep building on it. So self-awareness isn't a one-time shot, it's an ongoing thing, but with all the wonderful stories and offered tools, we can do the action to keep that going.
I don't even know if I need to say anything else. That was that was beautiful. I think like the connection, the transformation, and the evolution of who we are and how we show up in the world is what I see here and what I hear in our community, and I'm here for it. So much love to this group.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, there's themes that stand out for me. There's obviously transformation and leaning into saying yes to what it takes to come through these challenges in a way that connect and take us to more integration, more personal, more revealing, more vulnerability, and discovering that that is also the method to empowerment. And then once you do that, taking on the mantle of I'm going to help other people with the same thing. And that's what I appreciate about all of you, is like, it's not enough to just have this be success in your life. You've got to make it work for other people too. And so thank you so much for that. It's just been a fabulous conversation. Again, the book is Leading with Self-Awareness, Starting from the Inside Out. You can find it on changingwork.org under the media category there. And so it's a really fabulous book. You can also, of course, just find it on Amazon. And the tip of the hat to Changing Work, and Amy, for your role in getting this produced. It's an amazing gift to the world, and I'm looking forward to the whole series. I'm Brett Hill, the founder of the Mindful Coach Association and collective member. And with that, we'll wrap it up and say thank you so much for being here, everyone, and for those of you that are listening.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.